Welcome to the Gerontological Society of America's Momentum discussion, where we explore groundbreaking topics in the field of aging.
Welcome to this GSA Momentum Discussions podcast titled Family Caregiving, From the Personal to the Professional. Momentum discussions highlight topics experiencing great momentum in the field of gerontology. My name is Elana Kieffer, and I am the Director of Strategic Alliances at the Gerontological Society of America, also known as GSA. And I am pleased to serve as the host for today's Momentum discussion. Today's episode takes on a critical topic that most of us can relate to: family caregiving. Our guest today will share her personal journey caring for her father and how she turned this experience into a multimedia professional journey. Our guest today is Dr. Mindy Fried, an applied sociologist with over 25 years of experience conducting rigorous qualitative research studies. Mindy works with nonprofit organizations and foundations to help them build their capacity and strengthen their programs and policies. Her areas of focus include aging and growing older, workplace policies, arts, and grassroots organizing. Mindy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Elana. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So we're going to start right off with some questions. Can you tell us how you became interested in the topic of family caregiving?
My interest started from a very personal place. My sister and I cared for our father for about a year and a half in the last chapter of his life. He was 4 days shy of 98 when he died. And he had a very robust and celebratory and also traumatic life. He had a lot of years to pack many things in. When he was in his late 90s, he had a traumatic fall. It's upsetting. I still get upset when I think about this, but he had a doctor who had given him a medication for sleep, and it created some hallucinating and out of control body stuff. And he fell in a very harsh way, and he had one of those alert buttons around his neck, but he had arthritis in his hand. He couldn't even push the button. And he finally was able to get somebody to come help him. And he was in front of a door and something. All of that was just like many things that made it challenging. And the upshot is that he ended up having to go into the hospital. We had been talking to him about someday moving out of his home where he'd been living for his 90 plus years. And not exactly in that home the whole time, but for many years, and moving into some kind of facility. We had looked at an assisted living facility. This is in Buffalo, New York. He was so opposed to being there. But at this point, once he got out of the hospital, really there was no option but to put him into that facility once he got out of rehab and all the kind of medical stuff that he had to do. And he ended up living there for a year and a half. And so my sister Lori and I spent every weekend with him. And in between times, we were caring from afar, which is quite common. So I did end up writing a book about it called Caring for Red. My dad had been a communist in his early days, and he also was a redhead. But you know what I found? Like while he was there, I had decided, okay, I'm a researcher. I'm going to turn this into an ethnographic study. It's a personal experience, but I'm also in it. And so I spent quite a bit of time documenting what it was like. At the time, I was teaching a class on aging at Brandeis, where I know you also went. And he was living in the facility. I was teaching this class. I felt, okay, I'm learning more literature by teaching about the aging experience, and it feels very real. And the second time I was brought back to teach this class, he died on the second, like right before the second class. Wow. And I had this decision to make about whether or not I was going to go and teach the class. It was very traumatic, obviously, but I thought, okay, this is a universal experience, and why not open it up to students? And honestly, it was the most profound class I think I ever taught on aging, because sharing my own experience really opened people up to sharing their own experiences, a lot of which was losing grandparents who they'd been very close to. I got interested, obviously, in caregiving because of my own experience. I'm a writer. I process my feelings, my thoughts through writing. And so that is what I did. And after he passed away, I had a decision to make. Was I going to actually do something very concrete, not just, I had a blog at the time and I was just posting things here and there. And my first thought was, oh, I'll just put together all these different blog posts and they will all flow together into a book. And actually, that's not how books work. But I made this decision to try my shot at it. And I took a workshop at Grub Street, which is an amazing creative writing program in the
Yeah.
Boston area. It was a workshop on memoir writing. And it was, I would say that it wasn't fabulous, but it gave me some inspiration to really try it and stick with it without knowing, would it be a book for my family to process their feelings about the loss of my father and their uncles? And there's so many people in my family who loved him. Or was it something that would actually contribute to the literature, quote unquote, because there had been no ethnographic study on assisted living. There was a great book, Dying at Murray Manor, about nursing homes, and very detailed, very rich and wonderful and ethnographic book, but nothing on assisted living. While I had been there, I gathered enough data to be able to write a book that included an ethnographic perspective, a lot about what it meant to be a caregiver. So that was very memoir-ish. But also it had an historical element because my dad in the 1950s, again in the 1960s, was subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee,
Wow.
UAC,
Yeah.
because he, at the time, was a labor organizer and very good at his job and effective. And so they went after him like thousands of other people.
Yeah. And did he know that you were writing, not necessarily a book, but that you were writing about the experience of him living in this assisted living?
No. And honestly, I couldn't be truly forthright about the experience until he was gone.
Yeah.
Writing a memoir is a tricky thing because you have to respect all the people you write about. And there are things that I didn't reveal about his life out of respect for him.
Sure.
But there are other things about our complicated relationship that I did reveal that I really didn't feel a need to share with him at that stage in his life.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And you touched on this already, but can you just talk about some of the themes that came up in the book that you covered, or like how you organized the chapters, just for someone, a primer on the book?
Okay. Oh, the book is, I'll do my best. I guess first and foremost, I wanted to capture what it was like at this assisted living facility, which I called Harmony Village. That's not the real name. If you, I could actually read a portion from the book.
Sure.
When I first saw it, Harmony Village looked like a faux castle, an ominous red brick structure that extended one full block in each direction, with 4 floors and tall round turrets on each corner. I imagined that this fort-like building, which housed about 200 residents and apartments, was meant to evoke a sense of safety from outside forces, as if any place could guard old people against the inevitable death. At the front desk sat either John or Myra. If it was John, you knew you would get a straight answer. A former military guy in his 20s, he was reliable, kind, and looked you in the eye when he talked to you. John was super with it. If you got Myra, you were better off taking care of things yourself. She mixed up names and numbers. She looked at you as though she had no idea who you were, even if you'd talked to her on a daily basis for the past 6 months. I always wondered how she kept that job, perhaps thanks to the kindness of some administrator. The first time I visited Harmony Village, I couldn't imagine my father living there. I barely tolerated the tour myself. The hard sell of the too chipper marketing person who painstakingly tried to convince me that, quote, your father would be very happy here, made me want to puke. I tried hard to persevere. The overzealous guide led me through the dining hall, populated with a small group of women who were sitting together at a circular table, negotiating the food on their plates but barely communicating. She boasted about the amazing chef and how much the residents loved the food. It was over the top. Harmony Village was far from a 4-star hotel, but she would have liked me to believe otherwise. Later, I learned that the food was decent. The usual institutional fare was prepared with care and made more palatable by the affable food service director and waitstaff. They were kind and loving with every resident. Knowing that my father was a professor, the last of his many careers, My guide then took me to the library. She was thrilled to tell me, there's a professor here that your father would really enjoy, as if being in a similar profession is the tie that binds souls. When these two former teachers did eventually meet a year or so later, they found they had little in common.
It's beautiful writing, Mindy.
Oh, thanks.
Really. And really gives a good paints a good picture
Yeah.
of the scene. And as someone who works in that area and was that chipper marketing person, I so relate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think to your earlier question, the book tries to bring readers into the nuts and bolts of what it's like to live in assisted living and the dynamics of a hierarchical institution that tries to prioritize patients, but also has issues around staffing. And I'm sure staff didn't make a lot of money and people who were hard to deal with. There's just so many issues going on. And I wanted people to understand just the feel of what it felt like to smell and live and be in a place like that. And I also wanted people, as I said, to understand the history of my father's story. And I think maybe most of all, to understand the caregiving experience. My sister and I were quite lucky that we get along, we adore each other. She's so much older than me, and I was worried when we took this on together that she might be bossy, but quite the contrary. She welcomed my role, and I would say that we divided the work pretty evenly and really supported each other. I'll tell you one little story when we often would spell each other, and I was there for a weekend with my dad, and my sister showed up, and she arrived with chocolate, which we often did, from across the street, this place called Watson's that had sponge candy. And when she walked in, his first words were, "Where's my chocolate?" And my sister said, "Dad, Mindy's leaving right now, so why don't you first say goodbye to her?" And he said, "But I want my chocolate." And he said, "Yeah, say goodbye to your daughter who you adore." And so he and I said goodbye. I handed the baton over to her, but it was just classic. Like at that point, he was still with it, but he loved his chocolate and he was ready
Got
to
his priorities straight. I get it.
switch out his daughters for the one with the goodies.
It is funny.
Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, you started not one, but two podcasts related to aging and growing older. So what themes about caregiving have come up in one or both of those podcasts?
So after I wrote the book, Caring for Red, the subtitle is A Daughter's Memoir, it was published by Vanderbilt University Press. And while they didn't set up book talks for me, they supported all the work that I did to set up book talks. So I traveled the country and did I visited about 27, 28 cities. It was a lot. It was exhausting. And my daughter at the time was getting pretty excited about the podcast world. And that got me thinking maybe I could stop traveling and create a podcast about caregiving that without going anywhere, going places without moving. There are so many different kinds of caregiving. I knew that I wanted to focus on caregiving of older people. So I put the word out on Facebook and said, does anybody have a caregiving story to tell? And a few people responded, but I ran into a friend in the local park she was with her wife at the time. And she said, I saw your Facebook post and I have a story to tell. And I said, oh yeah, look, what is it? And then she looked at her wife and said, I can't talk right now. And that person is Laura Barr. And Laura was caring for her wife, Jean, who had early Alzheimer's. This is a number of years ago. And The Shape of Care follows Laura's story over a number of different episodes. And the first one focuses on bringing joy into their lives. She came from an RV family, and she bought an RV so the two of them could take off on weekends and have adventures. And then the next episode, she started talking about how things were getting sadder. And Alzheimer's, of course, is just a wretched, horrible disease. And so she watched her wife decline over the next number of years and eventually had to live in a nursing home because she obviously couldn't take care of all her extensive needs. And just to take a quick leap, and we can get there in a moment again, but my new podcast, which is just come out called Next Chapters, also features Laura Barr, because at one point, Jean, this is during the pandemic, when all the nursing homes shut down, and Laura wasn't able to go visit Jean, and Jean no longer recognized her on Zoom or on a phone. And Laura woke up one morning and said that there was actually a snowstorm coming in Boston, and she said, "I'm getting out of here." And she got into her RV.
Wow.
And she has been on the road for 5 years. And so there is an episode in Next Chapters called On the Road, Adventures in Aging. So
Wow.
Laura is near and dear to my heart and has quite the story to tell. It's fascinating. In The Shape of Care, I interviewed Laurie Sheridan, who'd been caring for her husband who had Parkinson's disease, and also followed her through her story. But The Shape of Care also took on all kinds of issues. When the pandemic hit, I decided to continue doing what a lot of podcasters were doing at the time, which was to create a home studio. I Googled it and did all the things. I was interviewing people on voicemail. It was really a just paper and paperclip situation here. But I put out an additional 11 episodes of caregiving during the virus.
Wow.
Which was really fascinating because I was able to capture the stories of essential workers, of people who were in a policy perspective, researchers who were trying to capture their experience in talking with me in Greece and Italy and places around the world. And again, did another follow-up with Laura Barr. So The Shape of Care, I think, first season did not have an arc per se. It was a lot of stories that I felt needed to be told. When the second season came along, some time had passed and I had an opportunity to think, and the pandemic had eased, and I'd had a chance to think more about what I wanted to fashion as a story. And so for the second season, I wanted to tell stories that revolved around caregivers and care recipients. And so I found 2 of those people who had a dual story to tell. And I had 2 episodes that focused on home care. And then I had 2 episodes that focused on living in a nursing home.
So I have one more question for you.
Sure.
I could definitely listen to you for a very long time, but you had mentioned when we had talked earlier about a caregiving support group that you had started in Boston. So can you just briefly tell us about that support group and why you think it was so needed to have that support group?
Sure. I'll say, first of all, I'm part of this secular Jewish organization called Boston Workers Circle. And I had given a book talk about caring for Red to folks who were part of that group. And I'm also part of a sort of subgroup within the group called Aging in Community. And so people were familiar with the book and people were talking to me informally about caregiving issues. And so one of the people that was a leader in that group asked me if I would run a support group for people who were experiencing caregiving. And I was really busy at the time. And I said, yeah, how about I'd be glad to do it. How about if I do 3 sessions and then kind of people can just be off on their own? I did what I often do is I did a lot of homework and kind of dove into it and considered it almost like a class. And I loved the people in the group. It was an amazing experience. And after 3 sessions, they talked me into doing 3 more sessions. And then after the 6 sessions, they did go off on their own and do their thing. And they are still meeting to this day. Yeah.
Wow.
And they've supported each other through so much loss and challenges and finding joy in the midst of all that. So it was a great thing to do. If I had a little bit more time, I would do it again. Honestly, that was one of the more profound experiences I've had.
Wow. Wow. I have lots more thoughts and questions, but we are going to wrap up. And I just want to thank you so much, Mindy, for sharing your story and talking about your book and talking about your dad and really the real influence that you've had on so many people. It's such a universal experience, family caregiving. So I thank you for the work that you have done and continue to do.
Thanks. It's been lovely to talk with you, Elana. Take care.
My pleasure. So I want to thank you also to all of those listening to this episode of the GSA Momentum Discussion Podcast. We hope you found it informative and enjoyable.
Check out GSA Enrich at geron.org/enrich for engaging learning resources, including toolkits, publications, webinars, podcasts, and more.